Recently, I spent 23 days on Holland America Line's flagship cruise ship, the MS Rotterdam, crossing the Atlantic Ocean and going to Europe for the very first time. I saw a lot, but specifically, here are 30 amazing things I saw on my very first cruise to Europe. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to La Lido Loca. I am your host, Tony, here to take you on a very special journey. Today, I would love to take you through my memories of 30 amazing things I saw on my very first cruise to Europe. And well, let's start off with probably one of the most notable events in maritime history. We're talking about the sinking of the Titanic. Sinking of the Titanic occurred on April the 15th, 1912. The Titanic was carrying over 2,200 passengers and crew when it struck an iceberg and sank. The disaster resulted in the loss of 1,500 lives, making it one of the deadliest peacetime maritime disasters in history. In September of 1985, an expedition located the wreckage site of the Titanic. The wreckage of the Titanic lies on the floor of the North Atlantic Ocean at a depth of around 12,500 feet, located about 370 miles off the coast of Newfoundland. What was amazing on this cruise is that we took a path that took us right over the wreckage of the Titanic. And on the very day, the anniversary of the Titanic leaving Southampton, we stopped and we commemorated the loss of that ship. I've always been fascinated by the Titanic and the search for the Titanic. And so to have this moment where we stopped at the wreckage field, it was pretty amazing. Now, after our transatlantic crossing, we made our way to our first port stop, which was in Plymouth in the UK. And of course, Plymouth Harbor is the iconic spot where the Pilgrims boarded the Mayflower to make their way over to the New World. And they commemorate that well there in the town of Plymouth. They have the Island House, which is the hotel that the Pilgrims stayed at the night before their voyage. They have the Mayflower Steps, which is a symbolic spot to commemorate where the Pilgrims left. And they also have a Mayflower Museum there in town. Historical places like this really move me because you realize that something happened here. Something happened here that impacted a lot of things. So it was interesting to be there in Plymouth, just soaking all of that in. Another amazing thing that I saw on that Plymouth port stop was Cotillo House. Cotillo House dates back to the late 15th century. It is a Tudor manor house located in the countryside of Cornwall, England. This is a medieval house offering visitors a glimpse as to what it was like to live in medieval times. Walls adorned with tapestry, gardens, orchards. Walking through the grounds of Cotillo, walking through the house at Cotillo really was one of those time standstill moments where you could really get a sense of what it might have been like to live during medieval times. The second port stop on this 23-day cruise was in Dover in the UK, a very rich and historical place. But the thing that blew my mind initially in Dover was waking up and sailing past the White Cliffs of Dover. The White Cliffs of Dover have captured the imagination of travelers for hundreds of years. They've been written about in books, they've been sung about in songs, and it was really an amazing experience to wake up, open the curtains of the cruise ship, and sail into Dover past the White Cliffs. Now, once in Dover, I did board a bus to go to another iconic location in the county of Kent, talking about Leeds Castle. Leeds Castle, dating back over 900 years to the 12th century, is another medieval castle in England. It was originally built as a Norman stronghold, and the castle underwent various transformations over the centuries, becoming a royal residence for 6 medieval queens. This is the stuff that you think about when you think about castles in the UK. Wonderful gardens, beautiful scenery, and really a connection to the past that sometimes we don't get here in the States. And so, yeah, this was very cool to walk the grounds of Leeds, to explore the castle, and to have that connection point. Now, another pretty interesting spot that I went to while on that port stop in Dover was the town of Canterbury, made famous or at least famous in my mind by my annoying 10th grade English assignment to read Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales. It was neat to be in this town, walked through High Street in Canterbury, saw the sights, saw a statue of Geoffrey Chaucer, and I was also able to take a glimpse at the Canterbury Cathedral, which is where the Archbishop of Canterbury resides. This was the individual who recently crowned the new King of England. And so it was really cool to be on the streets in Canterbury. And while there's certainly a lot of cool historical things to see while you're on these journeys, there's also just some everyday things that are kind of set in the location that you're at. I'll just go ahead and share some of those amazing things. These are from several of the different port stops. Tesco, for example, a local store there in the UK. Double-decker buses, red phone booth, red post box. These are all things that are somewhat locked to the geography of the place and makes them iconic, ordinary, but amazing at the same time. Now, the third stop of this cruise was in the Netherlands, in the port of Rotterdam. And there was some cool stuff to see in Rotterdam. Of course, we were docked right next to the Erasmus Bridge. Some call this bridge the Swan Bridge. Others have called it like a ballet dancer, a dancer bridge. Just taking that bridge in, watching barges and other ships sail under that bridge. Pretty amazing looking bridge. During my port stay in Rotterdam, I did venture out on an excursion. I went to the Windmills of Kinderdijk. Windmills of Kinderdijk date back to the 18th century. Of course, they are a UNESCO World Heritage Site. They really stand as a testament to Dutch ingenuity and engineering. Originally, they were constructed to control water levels and to prevent flooding in the low-lying landscape. 19 windmills of Kinderdijk are perfectly preserved, and they provide a captivating glimpse into the country's historic battle against the sea. Now, after leaving Rotterdam, we went to our next port of call, which was Oslo in the country of Norway. One of the more amazing, unexpected things that I saw on this journey was the Vigland Statue Park. This is one of the only few parks in the world dedicated to a single artist. The sculptures in this park were created by Gustav Vigland. The park spans over 80 acres and is home to more than 200 bronze and granite sculptures. Now, unfortunately, we didn't have a lot of time in the park. This is one of those places you really could have stayed all day. The sculptures were intense. Sculptures depict the various aspects of the human experience. They show a range of human emotions and relationships. Interestingly, all of the sculptures are nude, which might be a turnoff to some, but the idea was if you did not put them in any period clothing, that these sculptures would transcend time to depict the human experience. Amazing. Another interesting spot that I visited in Oslo, Norway was the Folk Museum, also known as the Open Air Museum. The concept is really, really interesting. It is a spot where historical buildings can be transported to and put on display in an outdoor open museum. Folk Museum was divided up into several sections where you could explore what farm life was like, what city life was like, all throughout Norwegian history. So much interesting architecture, so many interesting things to see here. And it was really the first time I'd experienced one of these open outside museums. I thought it was a really neat way to interact with buildings from the past, culture from the past. Another museum we went to in Oslo was the Norwegian Maritime Museum. We saw a very interesting presentation on old Viking shipbuilding techniques. Then we were also able to view interesting examples of different ships throughout Norwegian history. Final stop in Norway was the Holmenkollen Ski Museum and Tower. This was a legit ski jump that was used in the Olympics. Again, one of those things that you only know, unless you've been there, that you only know from TV or pictures, that kind of thing. It was really interesting to stand in a ski jump arena and take it all in. From the viewing area for the spectators to the actual ski jump, it was massive. Never seen anything like it before. It was pretty amazing. The next stop on the cruise was in Copenhagen in Denmark. And there was a ton of stuff to see in Copenhagen. One of our very first stops was at the Copenhagen Opera House. It allowed you to look across the channel and see some of the royal residences. What was interesting about Copenhagen is there were several palaces in the city, and we stopped at the Christianborg Palace. This is the spot where previously the Queen of Denmark was crowned, and we were able to go into Christianborg Palace and view their reception rooms. These are rooms in the palace, elaborately decorated, designed to be meeting places for dignitaries and royalty and other officials. It was pretty amazing just going from room to room, seeing all the variety of decorations. Christianborg Palace also used to serve as a residence for the royal family. No longer the case. The parliament there in Denmark now uses the palace for their offices, for their meetings. The prime minister has an office there. It was really interesting to be in that building. It was one of those times where you realized as an American that sometimes because of our rebellion against these older traditional tropes of royalty, those kind of things, you really do miss out on some of the pomp and circumstance, some of the grandeur of it all. But it was certainly cool to see what century after century of tradition had begot when it came to this elaborate palace. It was pretty cool. Another interesting spot for us in Copenhagen was the Tivoli Gardens. The Tivoli Gardens are famous because one Walt Disney made a journey to Denmark before he built his very first theme park, Disneyland. And it is said that that visit to Copenhagen quite inspired Walt Disney and quite motivated some of the design of his Disneyland theme park. And you can certainly see it there. I was excited to be at Tivoli Gardens, but the thing that made me more excited about Tivoli Gardens was another amazing visit for me. It was the Lego store at Tivoli Gardens. As a collector and fan of Lego, it was not lost on me that I was in the home country of Lego. The headquarters of Lego is in Denmark, and there's only a few Lego stores in Denmark, one of them at the Tivoli Garden. And it was very cool to go shop that store, to get an exclusive minifigure made there. I was able to cross off another Lego store on my Lego store collecting list. We finished the day in Copenhagen with a canal tour that dropped us off at probably one of the most iconic things in Copenhagen. Of course, we're talking about the Little Mermaid statue. This place was swamped with people. It was very hard to get an isolated picture of the Little Mermaid, but this is an homage to Copenhagen-born author Hans Christian Andersen, who of course wrote many fairy tales, including The Little Mermaid. And this is the statue that commemorates Hans Christian Andersen. This is another one of those things that have been floating around my head for most of my life. The presence of that statue just in my mind's eye, and then to see it face to face, it was really satisfying and pretty amazing. Now, after our stop in Copenhagen, we went to Amsterdam in the Netherlands to let some people off the cruise ship and to let some other folks on. Honestly, I didn't do a lot in Amsterdam, and I'm sure there's some amazing things I could have seen there. So no real highlights from Amsterdam, but there were still a couple stops in Scotland that were set to amaze. The very first stop on that last leg of the cruise was in Inverness in Scotland. And well, there's an iconic spot in Inverness. But before I talk about the icon, let me first talk about the cathedral there at Inverness. This is a wonderful piece of architecture. I am super fascinated by churches, and this really kind of set the stage for the day. Took a little stroll from the cathedral there at Inverness into the town, and it was amazing. I'll just keep saying amazing. After our time in Inverness, we jumped back on the coach, and then we made our way to the Urquhart ruins that sits right on Loch Ness. The Urquhart Castle dates back to the 13th century, holds a significant place in Scottish history. Over the centuries, the castle has played strategic roles in various conflicts and saw the rise and fall of different noble families. This was a cool spot to visit. You were able to actually go into the ruins, climb around the different areas, kind of take in, get a sense of what it was like when this castle was fully intact. But honestly, the thing that motivates you to go out there, at least the thing that motivated me to go out there, was to find the Loch Ness Monster. I did not find Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster, but I spent many moments staring out into Loch Ness. As a kid, with HBO in the house, there always seemed to be a series of documentaries running on HBO that explored these unsolved things like Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster and aliens and the quatrains of Nostradamus. Ever since I was a kid, fascinated by this place called Loch Ness and it was very cool to stand inside this ruined castle, gaze out on the loch, and yeah, take it all in. Pretty cool. Now, again, I think it's worth mentioning that not everything that is amazing has to be historical or significant. I saw some animals on this journey that I just don't see a lot of here. A bunch of sheep. I'm sure there's sheep in the US, but I don't experience them quite often. But there was a unique thing, the Highland cattle, this hairy cattle. We don't have that at all. So it was really cool to see sheep and Highland cattle. Now, my final stop on this epic first cruise to Europe was the port of Queensferry, which is essentially the gateway to Edinburgh. But Queensferry has some historical significance of its own. It is the location of the Forth Bridge. The Forth Bridge, another UNESCO World Heritage Site. This is one of the oldest metal railway bridges in Scotland, and it is still considered an engineering marvel. So iconic, crossing the Forth in all of its red glory. It was really neat to take in this railway bridge, and it was just the beginning as we boarded coaches and went to Edinburgh. In Edinburgh, we spent time at Edinburgh Castle. This is one of the most fortified castles I've ever seen in my life. I could not imagine trying to lay siege to this castle, but it certainly has significance. This is the castle where the crowning stone was housed until it was recalled back to London so that they could crown King Charles. A very interesting spot in Scottish history and a very interesting vantage point to look down over this massive city of Edinburgh. Now I've got another simple one for you, both at the port there in Queensferry, at the castle in Edinburgh. Saw bagpipers. Certainly iconic and relatable to Scotland. And yeah, bagpipers. Pretty amazing. I know it's probably commonplace, but it was amazing to me. Also in Edinburgh, we went to the National Museum of Scotland. This is a very interesting museum with tons of exhibits. One of the things that's interesting is they have Dolly the sheep. Do you remember the sheep that got cloned, the very first clone? I think this is a stuffed Dolly, I think. I'm not sure. I don't think this is just a replica, but there was a lot of stuff to see in that museum. Very cool spot. And then just another simple one. As we were driving around in the coach, we passed several places, including the birthplace of Alexander Graham Bell, inventor of the telephone. 30 amazing things I saw on my first cruise to Europe. There's probably 100 things I could have showed you, but let's think about the things we saw in this one. What was something that you'd like to see that maybe you haven't seen, or something that brought back a memory that you'd seen before? Have you been to Europe? What are some of your favorite things? Leave a comment below. Thank you so much for checking out the show today. I hope you enjoyed it. Please show your support by hitting the like button. This is Tony for La Lido Loca. Until the next time, we'll see you on the Lido. Bye.